Problem at all. So today we're going to be looking at covering an introduction to training document, or sorry, an introduction to reporting in FirePro. I will be covering a variety of topics related to reporting, and that's going to include the process of reporting, how to identify the report you need, and then dealing with some of the specifics of reporting. We are going to be working in the future on sessions dealing with very specific aspects of different types of reporting. And one of the things that we want to be aware of is that each individual department's going to have some wrinkles on these reporting structures based on how you've got things set up, other factors there. So certainly if you want to clarify anything or work through any of these reporting items as they relate directly to your own department, then please feel free to set up a training session with myself or contact Diego, and we can work through the specifics. So I think we have most people trickled in. If you have any questions or anything like that, the simplest way to do them is to pop that a note into the chat. I will keep that up so I can see the chat notes as we go through. And I will do my best to answer. At the end of the session, when I've gone through the topics that I want to cover, I'm going to hang around. If people have some specific questions, they can feel free to jump in at that point. So without any further ado, let's talk about an introduction to reporting in FirePro. So when we're working with FirePro, broadly speaking, reporting is a two-stage process. And the first stage of running any kind of report in the system is to search for the records that you want to include on the report. So for example, if in my mind, I think to myself, I would like to get a summary of all the incidents that we've done so far this year or last year or whatever time frame. I would start by going into the incidents module. And the first stage of this is going to be using the search functions in the list windows to find the incidents that you want to include on the report. So in this case, my search would be fairly simple. I would go into the incidents, search for a particular time period, say last year, run that search. As soon as I run that search, I'm going to see in the top left-hand corner how many results my search got. And we're going to talk a little further down the road here today about qualifying your search and looking for specific things to generate your report. But in this case, I'd say, okay, I now have the 421 or so incidents that I want to include in my report. And then the second phase of running a report is picking the report you want and generating it based on those incidents that I have selected. Now, in this case, what is going to normally happen is that many reports are going to have what we call a report parameter set attached to them. So if I select, in this case, a totals by type report, what pops up is a report parameters window where I can further customize how the final report looks. And different reports are going to have different report parameters. And normally what's going to happen is that you can set these report parameters as a default if you want to keep them the same going forward. But in this case, I can just use the generic default parameters for this report. In this case, we can see this report has the ability to include various pieces of information on it and to subtotal the report in different ways to include assistance reports. Whenever you see a report parameter window, it's going to give you some various different options to further qualify the report. So it's useful to look at those sort of things. We can talk about report parameters in the context of specific reports. But in this case, and in most report cases, just hitting the printer button here will move me past the report parameters. And then I'm going to be brought into my print preferences window. So the print preferences window is going to allow me to determine where I want this report to go. It's going to let me set what my report title is. So this will actually print on the report as well as the subtitle. These are generated automatically, but you can customize them for reports if you want to modify them. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead with preview and hit OK. So it sends the report to the screen. So now what we're going to get is that particular formatted report for the 421 incidents that I had selected in my search. And so that's going to give me my final output based on the information that I picked to be included in the report in the search phase. So my two phases of reporting are always going to be find the records you want using the search functions, and then pick the report and report parameters that you want to output those reports into. There are a few things that we want to think about in the context of this basic process. So the first thing that is useful to think about is that there's an idea that I call report perspective that can be really useful when you think about reports this way. So when I think about report perspective is, say, for example, I have a set of incident reports, and those incident reports have firefighter attendance attached to them. I can actually lay that information out in terms of incidents and which firefighters attended incidents in a couple of different ways. The first way that I could lay that out is I could select a set of incidents and get a printout of those incidents with, say, the personnel that were involved in those. So in this case, I would be getting a printout that shows the incident reports and a list of all the firefighters who were in attendance. That's a report from the perspective of the incidents. I can get that same information, but from the perspective of the personnel by doing a report from the personnel module where I do a incident attendance detail report for a specific time period. And what this is going to do is give me pretty much that same information, but from the perspective of the individual firefighter. Here is the individual firefighter and a list of the incidents that person attended. So report perspective is normally determined based on the module that you run the report out of. So if I am interested in reports from the perspective of attendance for each individual firefighter, I'm normally going to want to run those out of the personnel list window. Likewise, if I want to get lists of training sessions that have been offered this year, I would normally do that. Well, I'll do last year here. I would normally do that from the training module. I can then do a totals breakdown based on what particular records have been added. So this is going to give me the ability when I'm thinking about what kind of report I want to run. Let's just get Leo in here. When I am thinking about what kind of report I want to run, I will often be starting by thinking about what perspective is it from, and that's going to determine what module I go to look for that report in. If you want a little more clarity about the various different reports that are available, one of the things that you can do is right-click on any one of these list windows and select Help. So what that's going to do is bring up the FirePro manual for that particular list window. And what we can see on the left is that there is an option for specific training reports on the manual. So if I select the training reports, it will give me a list of all the various different kinds of reports that are available from that module. And if I click on one of the reports, it will give me a breakdown about what that report is for and a sample of what that report might look like. So that can be a way to kind of preview exactly what you're going to be looking at when you get a report. It's also certainly always fine to just run a report and see what the output's going to be, because that's going to go ahead and give you a breakdown of exactly, obviously, what you see when you run the report. You can't really break anything by running reports in the system. So you can always do test generations to see what kind of reports you can get. Now, when we are looking at reports in general, FirePro has several different types of reports that we have available through most windows. So when we look at one of these incident list windows, there's several classes of report that are available from it in various different places. Up at the top of the screen, along the top, there's a printer icon. The printer icon at the top of the list windows contains generic reports which are relevant to that particular window. So in this case, for example, for incidents, we can see a multi-period comparison report, a report which searches for missing incident numbers, or a set of risk assessment report classes, and also a blank reports. If you're looking for blank forms, they tend to be in this printer button up top. These reports are separated out because these reports will all have their own search functions or search characteristics, as opposed to the other reports that we run, which are all going to be populated based on the records that you have in your search window here. So these are not impacted by the search window items. The other reports are, though. So this is kind of a standard set. Each module is going to have some generic reports up at the top, which are available for you to use. The second class of report that we see is along the right-hand side of the screen in this vertical row of buttons next to the list. There's a scroll icon. This is a report which populates based on the template or the fields that we see in the list window. So if I print this report, it is going to print exactly what's in my list with exactly the same columns and data. So in this case, I can see I've got columns for number, date, dispatch time. If I print this report, I can print it to the list, and I will get exactly what I see on the screen as a printed report. This print list report always has an Excel output, and this will allow you to take exactly what's in the screen and turn it directly into a spreadsheet automatically. So that's a standard report that you're going to see in every list window. I'm going to come to the details report in a second, but I want to talk about some of the other reports that are in here. So some modules are going to have a graphing report tool. So this is going to allow me to graph my results based on a variety of different characteristics. So I could say, give me a totals by type graph. When I generate a graph, I am normally going to want to use the grouping function to take the large potential set, in this case, of responses and group them down. And I can pick what type of graph I want. It's going to give me a nice little graph function. So the graphing reports are available in a variety of modules that use graphable functions. There is also a Google Maps report. So the Google Maps will take the results in your list and push them out into a Google Maps overlay. In this case, I have 421 results, so I don't want to wait for Google to do all of those maps. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to left click and drag to highlight a few records in the list, and then I'm going to run that report. If I have a few records highlighted, the FirePro system will automatically run the report for just the ones that you have highlighted. If you only have one highlighted, it assumes that you want everything and will generate a report for the entire list. So in this case, I'll highlight a few, hit the graph function. What I'll notice here is that when I come into this print preferences window, I actually have two options here: print all on list or print selected lines. If I've got some selected, print selected lines will be picked automatically. That's what tells the report that you want just the selected items. And in this case, I'm just going to use the view function here. So this will push that report out into a Google Maps overlay. If you want, you can save this as an HTML document or screenshot it. But if I click on any one of these tags, or hover my mouse, it's going to show me what the incident number for that particular activity was. So again, whenever we're looking at these reports, these are always going to be filtered based on the reports that you have searched for in the system. Another report which we have available now, which is a relatively new report, is what we call our column summary report. So this is a really neat report because what it lets you do is you can leverage the function in FirePro that lets you pick the various different columns I'll just answer you in 1 second, Chad. So Chad's question is, what if you don't have the map and graph options? The map and graph options actually depend on the module that you're in. So for example, there isn't a graphing function for personnel, but the incident module should have them. If you don't see them, try resizing the window, but they should be there, depending on the module that you're working in. Not every module has these. But all modules do have this column summary report. So what happens is that this column summary report lets you leverage the ability to select various different columns on your list window. So for example, I could say, I want to have the officer in charge column on here, and then I want to run a column summary report for the officer in charge column. And what that'll do is give you a statistical breakdown for the contents of that column, in this case, officer in charge, and I can see, yeah, you may not have the column summary report button yet. That was a feature we added about 1 FirePro version ago. So next time you get a FirePro update, you will get the column summary report button. It is a brand new one. So what that's going to do is take that particular column and break down a statistical analysis of what percentage of each result you got in that column. This is obviously more useful for some columns than others. If you're dealing with a column that, for example, might have a very wide range of potential options in it, like something like total time, for example, you're probably not going to get great statistical results. But if it's, especially for something like lists, for things like author, who created it, what geo area the call was in, for example, is a great option for that. I could say, give me a statistical breakdown based on geographic area, and here's a statistic that shows exactly what you're doing in various different areas. So that's a very flexible statistical breakdown report that I think it's FirePro version, oh, I forget what the current version is. But the next update that any of you get will activate that option for you. So those reports are going to be available in most modules. There's also what we call a details report on pretty much any record in the software. So if I open an actual file, I can hit the printer icon up at the top and get a variety of printed reports, which are going to relate to stuff attached to this particular record. So if I use the print function here, again, I get a print parameters window. I can pick exactly what information I want on here. If you have a selection that you've picked on these print parameter windows, and you want to keep that selection for good for any time you run a report, this particular report, all you have to do is right-click on this green window and use the Set Default option. So what that'll do is that the next time I print that report, the exact items that I ticked off last time will be held, and I don't have to re-pick them the next time I run the report. So if I print this out, this is going to give me what we call a details report, which is a detailed breakdown of the specific record in question that I was dealing. So basically every module and every individual report in FirePro is going to have one or more details report that you can print directly from the report. And those reports are going to flow into your statistical reporting side of things. So the main button that I didn't click on yet for reports is this printer button here on the right-hand side, which is what we normally call our management report button. There's a specific user profile permission that controls whether users have access to these reports. That's what we would call the management report permission. If we look under the passwords function for individual profiles, we can see that in that each individual module, there's a management report permission. That is the permission that gives users access to the management higher level reports in the program. So the management reports, or the more detailed reports, are going to vary from module to module. Each module has its own set of reports. And normally those reports are going to function in terms of the report perspective thing that I was talking about earlier. Various different reports are going to break things down in different ways. If I look at something like totals by geographic location, this is going to take your incident reports and break them out based on geographic location, which is something that you do need to set up in FirePro in advance. So depending on whether that's been configured, you might see or not see some of the results in these reports. But I could say do that and get myself a breakdown based on my various geographic locations in this particular case. So all these different reports, again, are going to populate with the 421 incidents that I have searched for in this particular case. And it's always worth going through and running some of these reports to see the results. Most of these reports are going to have some kind of parameter function in them. Like if I look at an NFPA 1710 report, for example, I'm going to see it has a variety of different thresholds that I can customize in order to configure this report in the future. So in this case, I could quickly run that and see how does this stack up to some generic thresholds in terms of response. However, a lot of the reports in the system have some input guidelines that you need to think about before you just go ahead and run the report, because those input guidelines will have an impact on the end statistical information that comes out of the report. And this particular 1710 report is a very good example of that, because this looks at the response time for the call, the total number of on-scene personnel, and then tells you on a per report basis whether your department met those on-scene requirements that you've set or did not meet those on-scene requirements that you set, and shows you what percentage of the incidents met those requirements. But in a report like this case, there's a lot of incidents that you probably wouldn't want to include on a statistical report like this. False alarm calls, burn complaint calls, mutual aid calls, potentially. So a lot of the time, what you want to think about when you're in the process of running a report is, are these incidents, in this case incidents, the appropriate ones that I want to include in this report? If in this case, the answer would be no, these are not I don't want to include every single incident in this. So in those scenarios, what we want to do is use the search functions to take that larger set of incidents and narrow it down to the actual set that we want. And I could do it in this case by going, say, to response type, say, I want to use some chosen response types here. I'm only interested in fire, explosions and ruptures, vehicle accidents. I'll put in some of these, although they probably don't get used too much. I'm not going to say medical calls because that's a public assist, no alarm, no fires. All right, we'll just say these response types in this case. So now when I hit my magnifying glass, it's going to break my search down now to only 78 incidents. So I have a very different set of incidents that I'm working with. I may not want to repeat this process in the future every single time that I run a report. So that's where the function that we call the saved search option comes in. Everybody has